Hey guys, welcome back to another video on the channel, another analysis miniature video. And if you enjoy the content of this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. You have to hit the subscription button underneath the videos, completely free, and as you know, helps me a lot to reach the magical 1,000 subscribers on the channel. If you want, you can leave a comment and a thumbs up. Now on the agenda for this afternoon, we are going to take a look at another game from the recently finished World Senior Teams played in Prague with the two categories plus 50 and plus 65. A couple of days ago we saw a very nice game by Grandmaster Dr. John Nunn. Today we are going to check out a game played between German seasoned Grandmaster Klaus Bischoff, currently rated 24-32, but as we've discussed before, all these players are past their peak, and Klaus reached 25-50 some years ago. Very strong player from Germany who actually was an Olympic player. I think he actually reached 2600, if I'm not mistaken. With the black pieces, a club player, rated 20-39 FIDE, Jaroslaw Rogowski from Poland. So for those of you who don't have a FIDE rating and mainly play on League Chess or chess.com, I could probably suggest that a 2039 FIDE rating would be equivalent in a veteran player to something around 2300 League Chess, more or less, just to give you an idea of the strength of the player. Let's get into the game. I'm going to see Queen's Gambit, more specifically exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit, and Klaus will play Long Castle, which always gives for a very dynamic game. So let's start with d4, d5, c4, e6, knight to c3, putting pressure on the center, knight to f6, bishop to g5, pinning the knight. Now, if you're playing with black and you don't want to face this pin, a lot of Armenian players were playing bishop to e7 first, waiting for white to develop the knight, and then knight to f3. And although white can play bishop to e5, this is by far not as dangerous as playing bishop to g5 in this position, where white still has the option of developing the knight via e2. For example, in the line pawn takes castle, bishop to d3, 6, knight to e2 is the variation which was played by Kasparov among many other players, and is considered to be the strongest way to play against the Queen's Indian in the exchange variation. Rogowski plays knight to bd7, which is the Cambridge Springs. Of course, in the Cambridge Spring, you can spring a trap. And this is the trap that Rogowski springs on Klaus Bishop. But obviously it doesn't work. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. You could think for yourselves, if you want, should I capture that pawn on d5? And the answer is no. If white captures the pawn, he's in for a shock, because black captures back. We sacrifice the queen, but we get the queen back after bishop to b4. And this wins the queen, and black will end up winning a piece here on d8. So this is the Cambridge Springs trap, and you shouldn't fall for this one. Klaus obviously doesn't fall for it. He goes e3, c6, bishop d3, bishop e7. There are several moves here. h3 is one of them. Knight to f8. This is a slow maneuver, the idea of which is to put the knight on e6, hit the bishop, and then go g6 and knight to g7 and end up swapping off the d3 bishop with bishop f5. It's theoretical, it's correct, but it's slow and slightly dangerous, especially if you don't know how to play it properly. More principle would be castle. I have the feeling that white would play knight to f3 here, maybe queen c2, and now rook to e8 trying to get in knight to e4 at some point. More theoretical. And if black goes queen to c2 and tries to castle long side, on the queen side, we could go b5 and establish some sort of attack on the queen side as fast as possible. Anyway, black plays knight to f8, queen to c2, knight to e6. Now, exchanging is possible, followed by rook to b1, knight to f3, b4, and go for the so-called minority attack. This is completely possible and very principled as well. Bischoff wanted to play more aggressively, and he goes bishop to h4, and when black plays g6 to follow up with this maneuver, he plays knight to f3, castle, and long castle. Of course, if black plays knight to g7, we play g4, and black can no longer develop the bishop, and this is not good. You have a knight fianchetto on g7, which is very poor. So Rogowski changed gears. He plays knight to d7, proposing the exchange of bishops, which could have been done. This is perfectly possible and quite good, actually. Bischoff preferred to keep the bishop. I hope you caught that one. And here, for sure, Rogowski should have played either knight f6 or a5, one of the two. I particularly like a5, going for the attack. But instead, Rogowski played f5. Now, I understand that he's maybe trying to avoid e4, but e4 has its own set of problems. It opens up the position, but it leaves a d4 weakened pawn. So if you play knight to f6, we're fighting against that idea. Whereas f5 is permanent. You've weakened your king side permanently. You've opened up a lever here to open up files. And although you may have prevented e4, you've given me the square e5 for the knight or for the bishop. So I think f5 is a mistake and shouldn't be played. And I'm absolutely sure that Rogowski, after the game, would have told Bischoff the first thing. Maybe f5 wasn't such a good move. But of course, chess is so difficult that during the game, we see ideas and we see plans that we think are correct during the game. Only afterwards we realize they're bad, with the benefit of hindsight. Maybe Rogowski thought that it was a risky move, but it would work for him. Anyway, Bischoff puts the king on b1 and launches his first wave of attack with h4. Of course, black could play h5 and block the pawn, but again, there are many weaknesses here. Maybe this was a possibility. Instead, he played knight to f6, which looks okay, but allows the knight to jump to e5, winning a tempo by hitting the pawn on c6, which is duly defended, and we carry on with the attack with h5. At this point of the game, Jaroslav played passive. He played bishop to e8. Now, having to do a move such as bishop to e8, it doesn't really feel that you're working your pieces properly. Look how many pieces are sitting on the squares. This is actually called, there are different words to say this, but this is like a T. Now, if you have so many points in a reduced number of squares, that means your pieces are not coordinating properly and you're probably in a bad position. So try to avoid this sort of distribution. Instead, go for this sort of distribution where pieces are long range, protecting each other's and working together. A suggestion would have been what would happen if black had captured the pawn. It's always something you think about. I'm sure Bischoff would have sacrificed his rook and picked up the pawn on f5. He will definitely get another pawn. And the attack on the king is rather serious. So I think there's very good compensation here. Take, And now a very nice move, very fine move. Knight to e2, not at all obvious. Maybe he won't be capturing the pawn because there might be some pins, but the knight also goes to f4, pressuring on the king side. Very fine move. Rook to c8, knight to f4. The knight has to be exchanged, but now the bishop goes into attack. And just look at the disposition of the pieces here. This is a fine example of coordinated pieces attacking the king side, whereas black just has basically weaknesses. No? So bishop is actually playing this game very well, very well. Maybe it was time to play c5 here and just go for it. Yeah, I think c5 had to be played in this position, at least to try and suggest some sort of counterattack. There are several moves here, but I think queen to e2 might be reasonable, trying to get the queen to the king side, and c4, bishop c2 should be played. But knight to h5 is just too slow. Bishop h6 hitting the rook. And now I would just like you all to take a moment to look at this position and see how you would continue the attack for white here. Have you seen it? I think everyone would go for the same move. Definitely. g4. I hope you've seen this move. Opening up another file to the king. Opening up the long diagonal. A very aggressive move. Take. 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 And here Rogowski decided to resign and not carry on. There's a double threat. Rook takes knight. But also there's a threat of capture on e7 followed by bishop to g5. And some other threats. For example, I've calculated knight to g7. And of course, this is perfectly possible. Just winning material with no pressure at all. But also possible is bishop takes knight and picking up the queen on e7 with a check. So the resignation was totally justified, and I think this is quite a fine game to learn how to attack in the Queen's Gambit exchange variation. If you enjoyed the video, as always, leave me a comment below, thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video. I'm currently, when you're looking at this video, I'm flying over Greece and about to land in Cyprus. So hello to all my fans from Greece, Cyprus, Turkey. I'll be in Cyprus for 2 weeks. And if you're in Cyprus and you're a follower of this channel, come to the Nicosia Hilton Hotel, where there's the Women's Grand Prix being played, and we can meet and greet, maybe have a coffee, and I'd be glad to meet you and see what you think of the channel. For my Cypriot fans, have a good one. Improve, learn, get better.